How you doing? We're going to take some time here to talk about Interstellar and issues surrounding the movie. We will be touching on some of the backlash toward the movie, which was handled in part by Kip Thorne, and what I think may have been a misunderstanding about how science and storytelling relate to each other. And we'll go into why I think science has a history of PR problems when it comes to appealing to the general public. Lastly, we'll talk for a brief second about the response video that was uploaded to the Weta Effect and what I think about that. Okay, so let's go from the beginning. I am a science-oriented guy. I like to learn about what's going on in physics, and obviously I have some interest in movies too. So it was really great for me to see Interstellar. I was totally excited when I found out it was getting made too. That was one of the only movies that I heard about and said to myself, God, that is going to be awesome. How great would it be to get to write that movie or have something to do with it? Especially when Steven Spielberg was attached to it. That notion of wonder, the way it looked like it was going to be approached, is directly up his alley and really fitting with the type of things that I find keep a filmmaker interesting, which are other topics. Chris Nolan ended up doing it, super awesome too. I think he's probably one of the most talented filmmakers working today. But it did end up naturally being a Christopher Nolan film, which means it had different strengths and weaknesses than if Spielberg had done it. And I think in the process of that happening, we ended up with a really good movie on a lot of cutting-edge topics, at least in terms of what science has been addressed in films before. But in the process, I also think we ran into some speed bumps that illustrate some really useful and important concepts when it relates to science in movies, and the general relationship between the two fields. And that is today's topic. So, the key point that really jarred a lot of thought was actually, well, first seeing the movie and having my own reaction toward it, but also finding out about the book related to the movie, which was written by Kip Thorne, a physicist and a friend of one of my favorite scientists, the late Richard Feynman. It's called The Science of Interstellar, and in a lot of ways, it's written to explain some of what appear to be inconsistencies or non-believable things and plot holes in the film, which are some of the things that, if you look on the message boards and reviews, actually upset a lot of people who went to see the movie. And the goal, I think, was to show people that there actually aren't as many scientific flaws as to them it may have appeared. When you see people arguing about it, very often one person will reference the book. But that is actually an indicator of what I think is a bit of a mistake, and probably a pretty big one in considering how people watch and take in movies. You see, Thorne's approach makes perfect sense given his life experience as a physicist. People were questioning the stuff they put out there, and he decided to respond by essentially writing a scientific paper expanding on and correcting everything they were saying. And given his amount of knowledge compared to the people buying the tickets, it's pretty certain that he's right in most of what he said, on a technical level. But I think he was actually a bit wrong and a little misinformed by that same life experience in how he approached the problem, or what he was expecting. You see, you're taking life experience from one field that's not necessarily applicable to the other. In science, information is spread through academic journals. When people disagree, it's in a formal way, where they list what they find wrong about the paper, and the original writers are free to answer those concerns in a formal, detailed, and point-by-point manner. Other people act as independent referees and review the information and decide who is ultimately correct, and if the original writer is determined to be right, then it will be stated and everyone can move on with the process and study or keep working on the idea. This is a great and natural way to approach learning things properly and understanding them. However, science is different from storytelling in this regard. There's a fundamental ideological difference. Science has been designed and developed over time to help people understand and explore ideas accurately. Storytelling has been designed and developed as a practice over time to give people feelings that they want but aren't getting enough in the normal course of things. We've talked about that, of course, but the implication here is that the actual onus for judgment, the quote, final authority in what is right and what isn't, rests with the individual audience member and not with some objective authority or standard. The instinctive reaction of the audience member in storytelling is what should be triggered positively. And if they indicate through words or more likely through their actions that they aren't happy with what they saw, then that's that. The story has done something wrong. The storyteller's job, in this case the movie makers, is to give people something that will work for them. In return, of course, and this is another key thing, the audience member buys a ticket. They pay the $10 or $15, whatever it is now, to buy that ticket, and after that, the question becomes what you give them in return for their money. In science, people aren't charging for their ideas, so they don't actually owe anyone anything except for the idea to be accurate. The service to humanity, so to speak, is in increasing our understanding. Science ultimately is concerned with truth. Storytelling ultimately is concerned with happiness. The best science you can do is finding things that are true but counterintuitive. In storytelling, fitting one's logical intuition is a requirement to work. The double slit experiment in physics, which implies that light can be both a particle and a wave simultaneously, is an excellent bit of science. If it were in a story, though, no way. It makes no sense. Mega marathon runners, for another example, people who can go 100 miles without stopping, are scientifically fascinating. If you had someone do that in a story, heck no. It doesn't fit what I, as a normal audience member, would expect of what a person can logically do, and probably what other people would expect too. So we have the two differing standards, and I think Kip Thorne may have confused one with the other by responding to people's lack of satisfaction with some of the things that happened in Interstellar by writing a paper explaining the accuracy. When this happens in movies, and it definitely happens a lot, or I should say when it happens on a large scale, people having a problem with something in the movie, that's actually your data. It's your observation. That's what must be in accordance with your goal. And marketing people and studios actually have evolved, so to speak, to understand it and treat it that way. You don't question or complain about the scores you're getting on your test screenings. At least you don't if you're experienced at it and are trying to go about it intelligently. You simply relay that information to whoever's on your team and work on your movie, re-edit it or whatever, to try and get the reaction of people closer to what you want and what they expect. So, with that in mind, the reactions to Interstellar, if it did create a lot of frustration, were indications that the movie actually wasn't doing everything properly, regardless of how scientifically accurate it was. It's fine, of course, if the movie is scientifically accurate. That's not a point against it, but an inaccurate story that feels accurate will be better than an accurate one that feels wrong. Interstellar may have been in the second category. In some circumstances, that is. At least the scientific ones. It may also have been that there was a lot of focus on scientific accuracy and less focus given to accuracy in terms of how the storytelling worked for the audience, which fits the MO a bit of Chris Nolan. Everything we do has benefits and drawbacks, and Nolan gets a lot out of his talent because he's so ambitious. But the downside of that is that he can often miss little details that don't stand up to investigation. He can miss the trees for the forest, you might say. And that happened with Interstellar too. I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Let's assume that all the science is accurate and look at how the story unfolds. Just one example here, and it's kind of a spoiler alert, but not a major giveaway, I don't think. But if you haven't watched the movie, be warned. Okay, Matt Damon in Interstellar is one of the scientists who's sent to investigate the new planets. He's alone, and if the planet isn't habitable, because he's trying to see if it's a potential new home for humanity, he has no way back, since the Earth is dying and there was no allowance for that in the plan. Damon sends the signal that his planet is habitable. The other astronauts go there, and he tries to steal their ship and leave. In short, he lied because he was scared of dying there. They take another ship to chase him, and when Damon is trying to dock on the orbiting ship so he can get on it and escape, his ship blows up and he's dead. Now, that's not the climax of the movie, but it's a subplot, so it's not totally ruined for you. But first and foremost, there's a lot of reasons that you might look at that and not believe what you're seeing. If he didn't want to be left alone to die, why did he agree to go in the first place? Why does he suddenly try to murder the other scientists when he can just leave with them since they're there anyway? That's actually a weirdly common thing in science fiction, and I call it space fever. But that's not even the issue I'm bringing up. Those are just idle things, and you can probably read that in a lot of places. The real key thing here from a storytelling perspective is that was done in a manner that is very, very counterproductive, and in a way misses the point of why things like that happen in stories. In this case, the bad guy dying. The key concept is something I'll make a video on at one point, but we'll talk about it here. I call it causing ideas, and that's what I think was totally missed. Causing ideas means that the intellectual stuff in our stories, the stimulating ideas, the confirmation of our morals, the concept that draws our interest, and the plot elements that keep us watching, all actually spring from and are done best when they are set up to be the things that cause what happens in the story. You know, in some movies you'll hear somebody verbally state some supposed theme or concept, and you won't necessarily hear complaints about it because in some way you see that the movie addressed an idea which we want, but you won't feel the visceral thrill or the pleasure of the idea coming across to you yourself unless the idea is actually what causes the key parts of the story to unfold. This is a really, really powerful and important thing that applies in a lot of ways. It fixes all kinds of problems in movies, makes them much stronger, and so on. We'll focus on the various ways that works another time, but for now, in this specific purpose relating to Matt Damon getting blown up in Interstellar, the causing idea in the situation was just not used, missed, forgotten, something. It wasn't there. And I'll tell you what I mean, and I think this works pretty well to make it clear. You see, in the movie, Matt Damon is a jerk, okay? He's a bad guy. The purpose of movies in this case, the reason why we have bad guys, okay, you don't actually need them. A lot of kid stories don't have them. The reason why they're there is that they confirm for us that certain ways of behaving don't actually work. And when we see them fail, we draw pleasure from it. It feels good to have your worldview confirmed. But the thing that confirms your worldview, that shows that you shouldn't do what the bad guy does or you'll eventually get screwed, is that the bad guy's methods or attitude or whatever makes him bad makes him fail. You see, the bad guy, the jerk, doesn't just lose. He loses because of the thing that makes him bad. That's how we get that intellectual satisfaction. We see his bad trait specifically cause his downfall. The idea, the thing that shouldn't be done, causes him to fail. And we did not get that with Matt Damon's character in Interstellar. At all. Think about it. What made him a bad person? Well, in a general level, he was a coward. He wasn't willing to do what was necessary to help other people. He put himself over others. He threw away his morals or sense for self-preservation. So that's, in a general sense, what we don't like about him. Now, how does he die? He blows up. For no apparent reason. There's no connection there. The result, I think, is that we kind of say, yay, because a jerk died, but really it was a random occurrence. We're just cheering out of a sort of empty habit, because it looks like what we're used to seeing. But empty habit doesn't give you a special experience. There's no actual visceral reaction. And that visceral reaction is the powerful one that we want. That's the magic. So, in terms of storytelling, Matt Damon should have died or failed to dock with the ship because of his cowardice. Something about his fear should have made him pull away, while the other scientists or astronauts in the other ship went ahead and tried and took the risk and bumped him out and made it in. Seeing that very cowardice cause his failure is what we really wanted. That's the thing. And in traditional stories, the ones that seem simple but which survive so long, that's what happens. Icarus falls from the sky because he gets arrogant, overambitious, and flies too close to the sun. He was doing okay. The wings were working until he got the wrong attitude. And that led to the events that caused him to fail. Brer Rabbit gets away because he's clever and uses reverse psychology, begging not to be thrown into the thorn patch, where he's actually easily able to get away. It's good to use your mind and be clever, and the fact that he does so causes him to be able to escape. So, I'm never quite clear on what's fundamental and what's not, but I think I would call this a fundamental aspect of storytelling. The causing ideas have to be right, and in Interstellar, from that one example, but probably a lot more, those fundamental aspects were not in place. And that can be troubling because now we're at the point where we spend hundreds of millions of dollars and address all kinds of sophisticated science and ideas in some of our movies, but we get to the point where we seem to sort of just assume that we're doing this basic stuff right. You know, maybe it's a sort of arrogance or lack of respect or just confidence, too much confidence, I'm not sure. But it seems as though the attitude can sometimes be, oh yeah, here's your bad guy, yeah, he's dead, there's your basic boring stuff, now we're going to make a wormhole. You know, and it's like, okay, that's awesome, it's really, really cool to see a wormhole visualized, you know, I bought a ticket, I was not dissatisfied by that part at all. But let's not lose sight of the basics, because if we do, we're not actually making progress. And it helps to remember that there were a lot of stories told in the centuries or thousands of years before us, but only a select few are still around. That's not a coincidence. The seemingly straightforward stuff, the things that make a story work, are not as simple as it looks. There are a lot of ways to tell a story so that it's not that great to hear. You know, I wrote in my notes once that there are 100 ways to tell a good story and 1,000 ways to tell a bad one. So we have to keep that humility and not think that the stuff that came before, just because it looks simple, is actually simple to do. And we have to try to look instead at those early stories and recognize that there's some very special stuff about them that's worth learning and isn't that obvious or easy to do, and develop principles from it so we can use those ideas and hit all the check boxes ourselves, so that when we're putting the wormhole and the four-dimensional space on screen, we're actually making stuff that's pushing everything to a new level, and not sort of putting blocks on the top of the Jenga tower while forgetting about the base and ultimately having something that falls apart. Okay, now, having said that, that is the storytelling aspect, which when done right can be informed by a bit of cutting-edge science to really push it to a new level. There's also the other side of the coin, science, which actually, I think, can get pushed and improved by being informed by a bit of the ideas that work in storytelling. I know that probably sounds way out there, since science is a different discipline entirely and is already pushed as far as humans can currently in terms of formal investigation. But what I'm talking about is the amount of human energy that gets put into it. It's been said a lot of times, and I agree, that science has a PR problem. They have difficulty getting the general public to take an interest in what they're doing. Because, and this is the key thing, an interest from the general public translates into additional money to continue or expand the research and brings new people into it. That is where I think a glance at the fundamentals of storytelling can be very, very telling and helpful to scientists in giving us an idea of why a lot of modern science seems not to make front page news, when in some cases it seems like it should. And I want to go into that a bit. And the thing I want to cite that I think science and scientists are missing, well, I'll cite two things. The first of which is the concept of relevance. Relevance is a concern that comes from movie concepts, the things that draw people in at a glance to want to see a movie. And it means quite simply to me that the thing in question deals with something that's already on the viewer's mind. It changes it, expands upon it, affects their view on it, and so on. Where the world's going in a general sense, who the important people are, who we take care of, who we want to be safe and whether they are safe, who we learn from and whether we should, what's possible in life and reality, how safe we are, and so on. A relevant idea, one that grabs people's interest, will have an effect on something in that category. The Middle East conflict, for example, relates to terrorism, which relates to threats to individual people in the United States. So the rise or fall of terrorism is something relevant to each person in America, and thus stories related to it are in the news and in books and movies. The president, for another example, makes decisions that affect every citizen. So what he does is also in the news, and in books and movies, the president of the United States is constantly used as a character or plot device. Similarly, people don't pay much mind to new advances in science unless they represent something relevant to their daily lives. The confirmation of the Higgs boson was a significant step in physics, but to the average person it doesn't affect them or something they think about regularly. Their safety, their life goals, the people they care about or love, the people they want to love, and so on. By contrast, the Higgs boson picked up major public interest when a writer called it the God particle, implying that it somehow was related to answering people's biggest questions, like where the universe came from, or things related to their religion. This actually is what took off and got people interested. The actual scientists, of course, were not a fan of this title since the real discovery didn't do any of those things. But it's a great demonstration of how certain things pick up public interest. The science that you see in movies pretty much always overlaps with ideas that are the most relevant to people. Bringing back dinosaurs, which people, including myself, have always wanted to see, since they were apparently so large and scary and cool. Time travel, which would make so many things possible and alter our lives in so many ways that it's one of the most used concepts in movies, period. Space travel, and so on. Each of these is a significant shift to some aspect, and usually multiple aspects, of people's daily lives, and any scientific discovery is viewed through that lens. Now, also besides relevancy, there's the other big issue of clarity. Besides having an idea that affects something in people's lives, you need people to actually understand that the thing does that, which is in how the idea is presented. This is a pretty big issue in writing as a whole, but the key idea in this case is that, to be clear, to get the idea through to people and make it work in their heads, the writing has to be both accurate and efficient. It needs to represent an actual valid idea, and the person needs to be able to pick up that valid idea very quickly, with no problems, through short language that takes the minimum necessary amount of time, and thus becomes easiest to enter our minds. Note, of course, that this is a result of people having limited time, not a matter of intelligence. People can't familiarize themselves with every niche concept or scientific discipline and the jargon related to it. So, when speaking to the public as a whole, it's best to avoid jargon, since it will require extra time for them to look up, sometimes leading even to more jargon and a sort of unending trap that they quickly abandon or don't even bother with. The key conundrum, though, the problem, is that in academic and scientific literature, jargon is used constantly, because it saves time for people who already know that material. But this same style of writing is absolute death when you try to interest a person who is outside of the field. And it also takes a certain amount of understanding to be able to get outside of the jargon terms and still properly represent what's being said. So scientific language, because it deals so specifically with its own field, tends to be accurate, but not efficient at all for communicating. On the other side of the coin, politicians do the exact opposite. They are efficient with their language, using catchy slogans, short terms, and so on when they're campaigning, but they're rarely accurate, because it's more important that they appeal to voters than that they actually are right or wrong. So, campaign slogans like, "It's time for the truth," or "Go with Joe," don't really represent anything well, but they are very easy to read. You know immediately what you need to do, or it relates immediately to something that you think of as important, like telling the truth. They are efficient for communicating, but not accurate. There's no reason given why one person is telling the truth and not others, and very often in politics, everyone's stretching the truth. Similarly, no one would blindly follow another person, so the statement "Go with Joe" isn't accurate to what should be done and why. You're just left to fill in the blanks yourself. Now, on the other hand, there's scientific statements, like the expected value of a real valued random variable gives a measure of the center of the distribution of the variable, which is a description of an idea from probability theory. This is accurate in what it's saying, but inefficient. There's no way any of us can read that once without knowing already what the terms mean and pick up on it. The trick is, in a broad sense, that you have to care about and study both the material and the audience. If you focus only on the material, you'll be accurate in what you say. If you focus only on the people listening, then you'll be efficient. And to really get people's interest on a large scale in an idea, you want to be both. It's a difficult thing without a doubt. People who get known as the great explainer or the great communicator earn those reputations because of the rareness of this ability. But I also think it's something that can be improved upon if we recognize it and can work on it. And that will lead to both more interest and money in science, and also more truth and cutting-edge science in our stories, which I think would benefit everybody. Okay, one last thing. I'm really super excited about the Weta Effect passing 1 million views. That's something I never thought would happen with one of my glorified picture shows on the channel. I actually had some champagne for the first time in a long time to celebrate. But I should mention very quickly that it got pushed through the last few thousand views because of the response video by, I believe, Rocket Jump. The thing that I should point out is that they're actually saying the same thing that I mentioned at the end of the Weta Effect video, when I added what I thought was the best use of CGI, balancing the mundane with the fantastic accurately. I put up a shot from Mad Max Fury Road as one of the examples, and if you look at the thumbnail of that video, they used the exact same shot from Fury Road. So yeah, I don't disagree at all with the fact that CGI can be good and is getting better. But of course, things we say at the end of our videos are never as impactful as what's said and seen at the beginning. So with that in mind, none of this probably matters since it's at the end of this video. But it's a good thing to say anyway. Anyway, thanks for listening. If you do actually have the interest in these topics to have heard this whole thing, send me a message on Twitter or on Facebook at facebook.com/everythingstorychannel, and you can attend an hour-long talk and discussion I'm going to be having with the New York Mythology group at the end of August. Otherwise, I'm really glad you could join me, and I've got a ton more stuff lined up, so stay subbed. Thanks.